Before I start, sort of two remarks. So first of all, I want to maybe a little bit introduce myself and in the context of this war. So I was born in Haifa. I'm not right now speaking from Haifa, almost exactly 2 months before the establishment of the State of Israel. That means that I was born into the War of Independence. As you know, Haifa was liberated in April of 1948. So I was born into that struggle. Then I very well remember 1956 as a 8-year-old boy, when the Ibrahim el-Awwal, an Egyptian ship, sort of anchored in front of the shores of Haifa and started bombarding Haifa. So that was something that the first experience that is really in my memory. I served in 1967 in the Six-Day War in the unit that reached El Arish at something like 2 p.m. on June 5th in the Armored Corps. Then I served as a reservist in 1973. Then I served also as a reservist in the Lebanon, the first Lebanon War in 1982. So as you understand, I have had my experience. And as a civilian, there were the two Gulf Wars, where Haifa was also subject to rocket attacks. And then, of course, the 2006 Second Lebanon War. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So again, we're talking about Haifa being under the rocket attacks of the Hezbollah. Right now, Haifa is calm, and let's hope it stays like this, but who knows? So this is remark number one, just a very personal one. And the second one, since we're going to talk about economics, we're going to talk a lot about numbers. And numbers hide human suffering. So one has to all the time remember that the human suffering that lies beyond and behind these numbers. And this is very important, and probably I'll remind ourselves of this obvious fact also as we go along. So what I would like to do for me it is tonight, I would like to very, very briefly put the current war in the context of past conflicts, in particular, in order to show you how different it is. Then let us remind ourselves of something that is just 30 days ago, namely the state of the economy, when we have not even dreamt of something like that as it has happened ever, possible. The immediate impact of the war is the next topic. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about projections, in particular macroeconomic projections, concerning both the immediate impact of the war of this year, 2023, and the following year, 2024. And finally, I'm going to present a few thoughts about what, at least in my mind, is needed in order to overcome the shock, a very, very deep shock, which we are experiencing right now. Okay, so first thing is, again, putting this war against the background of past conflicts. And once more, in order to emphasize how much more severe it is than those that we have experienced in the last 15 years or so. So let's start with the Lebanon War. I've just mentioned it, right? That took place in the summer of 2006. It lasted 34 days, as you can see. It had a significant number of soldiers killed and also civilians. Again, the Hezbollah was firing rockets mainly at the northern part of Israel, including Haifa. There were also casualties in Haifa. And at that time, there was no protection against these rockets, right? So the Iron Dome was not yet deployed at all. So the call-up was 60,000 reservists. You can immediately compare to the bottom row, which is the current situation. So we are 6 times as much, or maybe not quite, maybe 5 times as much. Oh, one other remark I should mention, all of this information is totally open, right? It is from public sources. Nothing here is secret or anything like that. So there have been a lot of rockets shot at that time. But again, you compare it to what happened until now, we are already at over 7,000. So, and the damage was quite significant, right? So that if you look at the number of claims filed, these are claims for compensation from the dedicated fund that has been established in Israel in order to cover such cases. So these were, quite a large number, again, mainly in the north. Then we have the relatively short conflict in the Gaza Strip in January of 2009. And you can see, right, it was much shorter. The casualty number was shorter. The number of rockets fired was also much smaller, and it has not caused that much damage. But when we come to the protective edge case of July and August 2014, this is, if anything, more reminiscent of what is going on now, because there was also a ground operation inside the Gaza Strip. And with it, of course, the heavy price in life that was paid, as you can see, and again, the call-up was pretty significant. But again, it is all sort of much smaller scale relative to what we are experiencing right now, with, of course, the really incredible shock of what took place on October 7 with regard to the number of civilians killed, massacred really, and the 241 or maybe 242, the numbers are changing all the time, people who are in the Gaza Strip and nobody knows what their fate is right now. So now we come to the numbers, economics, right? So once more, we ignore the suffering in some sense. What you see here is a picture that is sort of representing 2 variables that are important for an economic analysis of the macroeconomy. So one of them is the business sector output, which I've denoted here by business GDP, which is sort of the darker columns. And then there are the lighter columns, which are representing government consumption. So government consumption in this case is including both the military aspect and the civil aspect of tending and care and of course repairing and compensating people for losses, etc. So when you look at the Lebanon war, this is quite surprising because in some sense, it didn't do very much to the economy, and relatively speaking, also the public expenditure during that period was not increased very much. So this particular, I need to control it from here, this particular case. Then when you go to the shorter skirmish in the Gaza Strip, so again, this operation Cast led in 2009 was much shorter, as you remember, and but nevertheless, when you see the public expenditure, it has increased quite significantly, and there was some impact on the business sector, in particular when you look at the following quarters. So the economy is not recovered that quickly. Of course, one cannot, it is not obvious that was the only thing that caused the economy to sort of not perform very well in the following year. But you remember it was also the world crisis at the time, but still it might have had an impact. But the biggest impact, and again, if you want to have any comparison to what is going on now with really due caution, is the protective edge case, again, at the Gaza Strip, with a tremendous increase in public expenditure, right? This is this light blue column. And however, when you look at the performance of the business sector, so again, one has to be very careful in interpreting such pictures without really going deeply into the analysis. It seems not to have that great an impact on it. And one may, and again, very, very, very cautiously argue that the Iron Dome that was deployed and surprisingly, with surprising success for the first time at that particular case, despite everything, and with a very large number of rockets fired also into the Tel Aviv area, enabled life to more or less continue. And therefore, probably, again, very cautiously, I make the claim that protection is probably responsible for the fact that the business sector has not reacted very, very strongly to that conflict. Okay, so now we come to the eve of the current war. And again, as a reminder of where we have been. So you probably all are aware of the fact that Israel was undergoing really deep internal strife, a terrible split within the population. And nevertheless, when you look at the economic performance of Israel, it was actually not that bad. So we were at a full employment level in the labor market. Growth rate of GDP was projected to be 3% for 2023. The high-tech employment, right, so that was a sector that everyone was or claimed to have been mostly affected by this internal strife, actually was still growing, not as fast as in the previous year, but nevertheless was growing. And it is true that investment in the high-tech sector went down in the first 2 quarters of 3 quarters of 2023, but this is mainly a reflection of what happens in this industry all over the world. Now, the government, so this is a new government now, right? I mean, the election took place at the beginning of November 2022. So the current government basically ran a deficit a little bit higher than it planned for, but still very, very modest and very, very manageable at 1.5% of GDP. And that also meant that the debt to GDP ratio remained more or less steady at about 60%, which is perfectly reasonable, right? I mean, it is really nothing to write home about. So the question, or what happened immediately upon the impact of the war, right? So again, we are talking about a total surprise, of course, and with horrible events taking place. And immediately upon that, so now that here the figure is a little bit is correct. It is estimated that about 300,000 people have been called up for reserve duty. Of course, naturally, they are mainly young men. And if I look at that figure, the 300,000 relative to the age group of 26 to 45 in the labor force, men, then we're talking about a quarter of that labor force. If we are looking at the entire labor force, it's about 7% of the labor force. So of course, this has a great impact on the ability of the economy to continue functioning and producing, certainly continue growing. On top of this, from both the Gaza Strip area and the northern border, there have been evacuations, both initiated by the government, about 130,000. And on top of it, many people have left on their own volition. So the estimate is that there are about 200,000 people who have left these areas and are not living in their homes right now. Again, that has a serious implication, of course, for employment and work in the labor market. And this comes or brings us to the estimate of about 550,000 persons. This is an estimate that I've been also involved in making, not working currently. So this includes, of course, the 300,000 reservists. The Ministry of Labor came up with a much higher number. I won't go into the detail, of course, as to why there is a difference. But again, the number that I believe is more closely to the 500,000 or so, and not to the 750,000. But anyways, this is still very, very much relative to a labor force of something like 4.1 million. Right? So this is really significant. And then what took place is, of course, a massive destruction, physical destruction, beyond the murders and the kidnappings, both in the kibbutzim and the towns surrounding the Gaza Strip. So there is a huge damage that nobody has assessed yet. And on top of it, of course, due to the war, the consumption has gone down. There is, an immediate reflection of that is the use of credit cards. So immediately upon impact, so to speak, credit card use has been going down by roughly 10%. And then since the ground operation has started, these numbers have been reduced by almost 20% relative to the same period last year. So this is, again, a significant reduction or an indication of a significant reduction of economic activity. Now, the construction sector has totally stopped, basically is not functioning. And this is due to the fact that most workers in the construction sector are either foreigners who have obviously left, or Palestinian Arabs coming from the West Bank, or Israeli Arabs. The Israeli Arabs also are not working, both because they are not welcome in the Jewish communities and they are afraid of reaction against them. So the end result is that the construction sector is really at a stalemate. The foreign tourism I need not explain at all. And then, of course, agriculture. So here too, the agricultural sector is very much dependent on foreign labor. Again, people left, and also once more on Arab workforce. So for both of these reasons, it has been indeed suffering and from lack of people working. There are a lot of volunteers who try to replace these workers, and right now, I must say, at least my experience is that there is no shortage of supply. Then, of course, the military operation is very expensive, right? This is very sophisticated ammunition that is being used, both from the air and the ground. This is again, very, very expensive. There are two sort of points that I've want to emphasize that are reducing a little bit the blow or cushioning it a bit. So first, there has been an unprecedented recruitment of people both inside Israel and, of course, outside Israel, supporting the civil society. And this is tremendous. And then the political side is, of course, also very, very impressive, right? There is massive aid from the United States. So there is a huge military deployment of military forces, both at the eastern part of the Mediterranean and in the Gulf. And of course, President Biden has pledged $14.3 billion as aid. So this is a very massive package that is going to really be useful to pay for these war expenditures. So I want now to come a little bit to the immediate economic reactions. So one indicator is, of course, our stock markets, right? So if you look at this particular picture, you can see what happened both in the Standard & Poor's index and the Tel Aviv 125 index, starting at the end of August. So I simply used the end of August as a norm, and everything is measured relative to that point. And as you see, actually, the Israeli market did essentially a little bit better than the American one, until, of course, the onslaught of this war. Then there was a tremendous drop in the value of Israeli stocks. It jumped down off this, greenish curve relative to what happened in Standard & Poor's. There have been a certain recovery. I won't go into that last week in both markets. So still, the Israeli market is very much associated with that of the US. So there is some correlation that you see here, but the gap is significant, right? So from, roughly speaking, plus almost 5% at the eve of this attack in favor of the Tel Aviv, we are now at minus 10% or even more. The other indicator is the world reaction. The world reaction here is measured through something that is called the credit default swap. And this is basically an instrument that enables people to buy insurance against the case of a default of an associated debt. And in this case, what you see here is the default, the rate at which people can insure themselves against the default of Israel concerning 5-year bonds. And again, you see it was roughly speaking at 0.6%. So this is a premium that if you wanted to insure yourself against an Israeli bankruptcy, that you had to pay. And this jumped to 1.4%, almost, in no time. And it is still there. Also today, I've checked. So just to give you a little bit of a perspective on that, the US actually is not doing very well on this particular indicator. So the US is at 0.4, but if you look at Germany, for example, it is at 0.2. If you look at Switzerland, it is at 0.06, right? So there is no risk. And the other thing that may make you understand what this means is that Israel, before the war, was credited at relatively high rates by the ranking companies, and all three of them, have issued warnings, in particular immediately after the start of the war, that Israel's outlook is not very good. And the same agencies rank, let's say, Mexico much, much lower than Israel, and Mexico's CDS is something like 1.1. So this is really, really a worrisome indicator. And I'll come to that, of course, that it needs to be taken care of. So finally, another indication as concerning how Israelis feel about their economic security, you can see it given the exchange rate. So the natural escape from risk is, of course, to buy foreign denominated assets that are not subject to that particular risk. And of course, when that happens, the exchange rate is depreciating. And you can see here what happened, right? So it was at something like 3.85, and it went up and up and up until it reached to something like 4.05, a little bit more. And now you have a decline in the last days. The first sort of installment of this decline is due to the to global events. So the dollar has been weakening all over the world. It is because of the because the Fed has indicated that it is not going to further increase the interest rate. And then today, the exchange rate has dropped by almost 7 agorot, if I remember correctly, as you can see it, right? And I called it the Nasrallah effect. So as you know, Nasrallah, the chairman of the Hezbollah, held a speech on Friday where he indicated, and we at least the market seemed to be believing him, that the Hezbollah will not get involved in the war. There are skirmishes along the Lebanese war, but nothing like the 2006 wars where the Hezbollah was firing rockets all over. So again, the sense of security, or the increased sense of security, has an immediate impact, as you can see here, on that particular indicator, and I'll come back to this issue again when I sum up. So I turn now to the issue of projections. Now, when one makes projections under the circumstances which we are facing right now, one has to make assumptions. There is no other way, right? And here is a set of assumptions that is common to all the projections that I'm going to show you. First of all, and again, coming back to the issue of the Hezbollah in the north, that indeed there will be no conflagration in the north. Then somehow, and I have already alluded to that, the sense of security will be restored. Of course, this depends on what will happen militarily and politically, but the assumption underlying these projections is that somehow this will work. Then, and this is a very important issue, the government will completely revamp its budget for 2024 and adjust priorities. Now, it sounds as though a little bit odd maybe to people who are not familiar with Israeli politics, but the new government has passed a bi-yearly budget in May, if I remember correctly, of this year. So there is a budget that the Knesset has approved for 2024. Of course, you know, nobody has again dreamed of something like this happening when the budget was passed. Now, that budget anyhow came under severe criticism of a lot of economists because of its priorities. It has not put enough emphasis on government policies supporting growth. And of course, this is now in dire need, and let alone the immediate expenditures that need to be taken care of. So this needs to be done, and the government is dragging its feet on that. So we hope that it will happen, but this is certainly a condition that is sort of underlying the projections that I'm going to show you. Then again, there is some kind of a hope maybe that the military action will subside, at least, you know, the intensity will subside by the end of this calendar year. And therefore, this will enable, of course, the releasing gradually the reservists. They will return to their jobs. The education system, again, it is starting to function right now. It needs to be returning to normal functioning in order to enable, in particular, mothers to small children to return to their jobs. And once more, if there is a relative sense of security, then the evacuees, at least from the north, whose houses have not been damaged, will gradually return home and again to their jobs and to their normal life. And now we come to the United States. Given the turmoil in the Congress, we certainly hope that the aid bill will indeed pass, and these $14.3 billion will materialize. So, subject to all of that, I'm going to present to you three projections of three institutions. All of them, as I say, are public. So the first one is the Bank of Israel. So the Bank of Israel has come up with about a couple of weeks ago with its projection to 2023 and 2024, sort of taking into account, of course, the war. Then Standard & Poor, when they issued their warnings concerning the credit ranking of Israel, have also published a very detailed table on a lot of macroeconomic variables in Israel, and I don't know the methodology, but I'm reporting here what they have come up with. And finally, the Aaron Institute has also done work on sort of projecting what is going to happen or likely to happen under these circumstances that I've just mentioned. And I've been part of that work, so I feel very comfortable reporting to you what the results are, because I know what the methodology was, I know exactly what assumptions have been undertaken and how these numbers have been created. Now, remarkably, the Aaron Institute is very, very close to the Standard & Poor projection. Again, I have no idea how the Standard & Poor did their work, but as you can see here, when you look at what will happen or is expected to be happening in the current quarter relative to the fourth quarter of 2022, originally it was expected to grow at 2.9%. The economy was expected to grow at 2.9%. The Bank of Israel is still projecting a positive growth, a very small one, but still positive at 0.4%. And both the alternative projections are talking about a decline of GDP in the fourth quarter of this year relative to that of the parallel of last year of 2.5%. Now, mind you, Israel's population is growing at 2% a year. So that means, of course, that per capita, the economy is going to shrink, because if you take minus 2.5 and you reduce, of course, another 2%, you get a very severe shock. Now, if you look at and it may be interesting to compare that to what happened in the second quarter of 2020. As you remember, that was when Corona really started being a problem, with a lot of lockdowns, etc. So in that quarter, the Israeli economy shrunk by 7.8% relative to the parallel quarter in 2019. Now, of course, and this is much, much more severe than what will happen probably in this quarter. But mind you, what the lockdown, of course, forced people to stay home. And basically, 1 million people of the Israeli labor force were simply idle during that period. So it's a quarter of the labor force. And right now, we are talking, as I say, about something like 550,000, maybe 500,000. So this is much less. And on top of it, the economy, as I say, even under war, is still functioning. So that's why, severe as it is, the reaction is not projected to be as serious as that took place during the Corona crisis, the beginning of it. But of course, what you also see in the Corona crisis was the extremely rapid sort of resurrection, if you so wish, of the economy. This is not only true for Israel, it is basically true everywhere. But in Israel, it was very remarkable. And this is probably not going to happen this time for all these reasons that I have mentioned, right? There is going to be fighting going on, reservists will continue to serve, etc., etc. So now we are looking at 2024. The original projection was that the economy will grow at 3%, just like it was projected to grow this year. The Bank of Israel has knocked off just 0.2 percentage points from that. And so as you see, the Bank of Israel is much more optimistic than either Standard & Poor or the Aaron Institute. So why? Because first of all, even during the war quarter right now, they believe that economic activity will sort of resume more quickly, let alone next year. So this is why they are relatively, not relatively, they're really much more optimistic, in particular with respect to 2024. The alternative projections, as you can see, are growth rates that range between 0.5% and 1%. That means, of course, again, negative growth rates per capita. So this is basically what we expect to happen with the Israeli economy overall. Now, these projections, of course, have an immediate meaning when we try to project the government deficit. So the government deficit is sort of composed of two elements. On the one hand, you have income, so tax revenue. On the other hand, you have expenditure. Now, the tax revenue is relatively easy to predict once you have a prediction of what is going to happen to GDP, because there is a very close relationship between the level of economic activities and the tax collection. On the other hand, of course, when you try to project expenditure, this is extremely difficult. So in particular, we don't know to what extent the military operations will continue, how quickly the restructuring and the rebuilding will take place, to what extent the economy will need to continue to be supported, et cetera, et cetera. So all of these are assumptions that go into these estimates. And I should mention also that all of these estimates are taking for granted, so to speak, that the economic aid from the United States, military aid from the United States will materialize. So as you see here, originally this year was supposed to be ending with a negative, deficit of 1.3% of GDP. The Bank of Israel has updated that to minus 2.3. Both Aaron Institute and S&P, as you see, are very close again, right? It's roughly speaking 5% deficit. The same is true more or less for next year. Originally, the deficit was projected by the Bank of Israel to be 1.5%. They have increased it by 2 percentage points, mainly because of the increased government expenditure, of course, because they didn't project much of a change in economic growth. But again, the alternatives are at 5% and more concerning the projected deficit. Now, the projected deficit, of course, immediately translates into Israel's debt. You can see that it has been declining nicely. It reached a peak again due to the Corona year of almost 71%. Then it declined very rapidly because of the very rapid, as we have seen already, recuperation of the Israeli economy. So it reached 60.8%, was supposed to go down even a little bit more to 60.5% this year of GDP. Now you see again the reflection of the deficits in the various projections concerning the debt. So it ranges between 62% and 64%. And then for next year, originally the debt burden relative to GDP was supposed to be declining to 59%, and it is probably going to reach something like 67 or even 68%. Now, this is important because unlike the situation during the Corona years, when the interest rate was basically zero, so having a large debt did not mean a large burden on the Israeli economy and the Israeli taxpayer. Now we are talking about an interest rate environment that is about 4.5%. And when the economy is growing at 1% or 0.5% or something like this, it means that the country cannot pay for the increased debt that it is accumulating simply by earning more, right? By growing faster. And that has serious implications, therefore, for the for the funds that need to be diverted in favor of servicing the debt. And therefore, it is crucial that the deficit be held in check because again, every percentage point in deficit means increased debt. And increased debt, once more, means increased debt service. Okay, so let me sum up. So here is a little bit what I think has happened and what needs to be happening. So this really terrible and brutal pogrom that was perpetrated by the Hamas, it's from the economic point of view, right? I'm not talking about anything else. It has shattered the sense of security of Israelis. And, you know, one sees it everywhere. One sees it in the neighborhood. I live in a very, 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 you know, it's a relatively well-to-do neighborhood, very secure in the top of the Carmel. And people here are simply accumulating weapons because they're afraid for their life. This is what is going on. And mothers are afraid of sending their children to school. And some are going abroad in order to avoid the, you know, the danger of being in Israel. You know, so this affects everyday life in a tremendous way. And now also from the point of view how we are looked at from outside. So Israel had this image of, you know, this high-tech nation that cannot be beaten, that sees everything that goes around, etc., and therefore is invincible. And then you have these people from the, I don't know, right? I mean, I don't want, maybe not shouldn't even call them people. So these terrorists coming from the Hamas with really primitive means and shattering all of that all at once with terrible consequences. So of course that means also that people looking from the outside, both benevolent people and certainly those who are less benevolent, are looking at Israel in a different way. Now, I've already alluded to the issue of the internal Jewish-Arab tensions and the consequences, the immediate consequences concerning the construction sector in particular. But this has also deep sort of repercussions concerning, again, the entire integration of the Israeli Arab population into the economy. That was a thing that, you know, there was dynamic in this process, very, very positive, where the Arab middle class more and more got integrated into the Israeli economy. There was still a lot of work to be done, in particular with labor force participation of women, but the education level of women has increased dramatically over the last, Arab women, I mean, over the last 20 years. Arabs are you know, there are a lot of people in the medical sphere from the Arab community. So things looked very good. And all of this has been shattered also, you know, during these few hours of this terrible massacre in the area of the Gaza Strip. So that needs to be taken care of, right? So again, it is part of this issue of this sense of security. So this is, you know, without that, all of these projections that I have presented are not going to materialize. The results are going to be very, very, very much worse. So that is essential, that the internal and external confidence will be restored. And that depends, of course, on what will happen in the military sphere, right? To what extent the military operation will be successful. It depends crucially on international support, of course, in particular the United States, but also the Western nations in Europe, which means, of course, that there are limits to what Israel can do. Repatriation of hostages, this is really, really, you know, essential, right, in order to raise morale and prove that the state is really standing there for its citizens. And all of that requires really very responsible and very professional political and economic leadership. And this is something that I'm not sure we are endowed with right now, but let's hope that this will somehow be resolved. So with this, I want to end. I want to thank you very much. And of course, thank you for your continued support, right? That is really essential, heartwarming. It is giving us once more a sense of security. And as I say, it is indispensable.
Thank you very much, Benny. So I don't at the moment see any questions in the chat, but you're all welcome to add in questions if you have. But so I'll ask you a question, Benny.
Okay.
So we saw, we saw the three different sets of projections with respect to what's going to happen, and we saw two very, very different sets of numbers. So we put the S&P numbers aside. The numbers of the Bank of Israel and your numbers are vastly different from each other, and they're different. I mean, to a very, very large degree. Can you explain at all, what the source of the difference is? Why is the Bank of Israel so much more optimistic than you are?
The Bank of Israel. Okay, so again, we have held a discussion, of course, in order to try to clarify exactly this point, because it is really striking. I should be careful, because after all, they're not here to defend themselves. But essentially, we have seen what happened during the Corona period, right? So during the Corona period, we saw a very, very rapid, quick, recuperation of the economy. And the model that the Bank of Israel is running, like every model, sort of reflects past experience. And the model sort of tells them that the economy will recover rather quickly. This is basically where we differ. And we have not done it with any model, right? We have done it by hand, so to speak, sort of making what we thought were reasonable assumptions concerning the pace at which the reservists will be returned to the labor market, etc. And so we did it really, as I say, manually, right, without any analytical model, and we came up with something that is much more cautious. But this is essentially the difference, because if we adopt a rapid recuperation similar to what the Bank of Israel is doing, we also get the numbers. So this is the source of the difference, and well, we'll see whether they.
Yes, we will.
Sorry?
Okay, so Adam Chill asks, how can the construction sector recover in the absence of tens of thousands of Palestinian workers?
Basically, it cannot. So this is the simple answer. So it is essential that these people return to work. The government has already undertaken some steps in order to sort of enable that. At least they have somehow reprimanded mayors who actually prevented Arab workers from entering their cities. That is strictly illegal. And again, they have been reprimanded. There was a court case, and there was some kind of a compromise. Let's not get into the details. All of that is very, very shaky right now. So without, again, sort of returning the relationship between Jews and Arabs at least a little bit towards a normal situation, the Arabs will simply not come back to work because they are afraid for their life. It is as simple as that. So it is essential to indeed return them, and it is essential to do that by changing the atmosphere in Israel.
Alex Weinreb asks, could the increased solidarity created by this war have positive macroeconomic effects?
Whether we could increase solidarity?
Could the increased solidarity created by the war?
Okay, this is something that an economist has very little to say about, right? So solidarity is a very slippery concept from the point of view of an economist, unfortunately. And right now we see a lot of it, right? So people have really been recruited into this effort. We have mentioned it already, right? There is a tremendous voluntary work going on people going to pick fruit and do agricultural work, and people going and teach in makeshift schools of displaced people, etc., etc. Everywhere you look, you have this particular activity. So this is really, really remarkable and really heartwarming. To what extent this is going to continue once the tensions go down, right? So this is in some sense a paradox. This is at least I'm a little bit skeptical, because the underlying split that has sort of characterized the Israeli political life up to October 6th is still with us. And this, I come back to the issue of leadership and professionalism and all of that. So all of these things are essential to restored credibility, and with credibility comes also solidarity.
Thank you. Modi R asks, have you run the GDP projection analysis when some of the assumptions do not hold, specifically diverting funds towards growth? Thank you.
Specifically again?
Diverting funds towards growth.
Yeah, okay. That is, okay. So again, this is, of course, a natural question, and in some sense, implicitly I've invited it. The point is that I am not aware of anyone who has dared to make a prediction based on, let's say, less favorable assumptions. It is really, in particular, of course, if the Lebanon front explodes, this is something that is right nobody can fathom. But the issue of diverting funds is of crucial importance simply because of the deficit. So again, having a large deficit, right? I mean, is going to be very, very expensive. And therefore, again, it takes leadership to simply say, we need to divert these funds. We need to see to them, to it that whatever the government is doing is either directly related to the war or is supporting future growth. Because both of these are, of course, interrelated in order to return Israel to its place, at least to some extent. It will never return to where it has been, but return a little bit to some extent to a normal situation and again, restore confidence.
Tracy Salkowitz asks, what's the relationship between the economies of the West Bank and Gaza and Israel?
That's a complicated question. So the Gaza Strip was basically cut off from Israel, right? There have been people working, a few thousands, Gazans in the area immediate to the Gaza Strip. Actually, some people claim that some of these workers have also been spying, which is perfectly possible, but we don't know. But basically, the Gaza Strip was, of course, cut off from the Israeli economy, in particular, from Israel, right? Except for the essential goods that have been allowed into the Gaza Strip. So the Gaza Strip has been, again, not been part of the Israeli economy for a long time now. This is not the case with the West Bank. So there are tens of thousands, I don't remember exactly the number of licits, so of people who are permitted to work in Israel, and probably double the number of people who are working in Israel without being permitted. And they are really, again, supporting, almost any sector that you can think of where menial work is needed, and the typical Israeli will simply not refuse to sort of to take part in these activities. So this is construction, hard work, dirty work. This is agriculture, again, hard work, maybe also not as dirty, but also, and the like. So these two economies have been interlinked more than we can see at the surface. And cutting off the West Bank economy, the Palestinian Authority, totally from Israel, is impossible both ways. So it's going to really create a huge crisis also in the West Bank, and this is not a good idea. And it is going to cause hardships on the other side, right, and on our side, because these workers are essential.
Fabian Franks, first of all, thanks you for the interesting lecture, and then asks which sector is affected the most at the moment, and which mechanisms exist to compensate losses there in the long term. Well, I think we said it was the construction and tourism.
Yeah, no, these two are going again. Construction will have to be. There's no other way. There will need to be some kind of a solution, because there is a huge pressure in the housing sector in Israel, right? Again, with a population that is growing at 2% a year, you need a lot of new homes. And the housing prices, you know, in Israel are extremely high. And if there is no construction, they will just increase even further.
Right.
So this is essential to restore that particular industry. Now, tourism, it will take time, right? But the tourism industry is not very important, luckily. That was also our luck during the Corona period. So the Israeli economy, unlike, let's say, Austria and Switzerland, in countries that are really heavily dependent on tourism, has not been much affected by the demise of tourism during the Corona crisis. And also now, right, it is a small sector not contributing a lot to GDP. So
right.
This is...
Right. So when you say not important, you mean that it's just not a large part of the economy?
It's not a large part of the economy, yes.
It's still important, very important, but
okay.
It's not a very large part of the economy.
Fine, I stand corrected.
Fran Quintel asks, from her iPad, it just tells me it's her iPad, what is happening with collaboration between Israel and US tech companies and also universities?
So the high-tech industry, that's an interesting question, because of course, when you talk to people in the industry, so it's essentially what you hear is, on the one hand, that right now investments are on hold. Now, the high-tech industry, its luck in some sense is, of course, that the shekel has been depreciating very rapidly, I mean, before the war, because of the political tensions. And they are really still well endowed with funds that they have raised during the Corona period. There was a huge investment in high-tech in Israel. And these monies are there, right? They're all in dollars. And these dollars are worth more in terms of shekels, which enables the high-tech sector to survive, despite the fact that right now probably there is nothing coming in. However, and this is the big however, when you talk about, again, when this is coming from within the industry, so when you read what these people say, hear what they say, and you read what they write, they claim that there is a very good relationship with the investors abroad. Everybody understands what is going on. There is a lot of sympathy to Israel. Of course, there is expectation that some fields within the high-tech sector are going to be enhanced because of this crisis, particularly military-related high-tech industries. So, again, once this subsides, I think one can fairly safely say that the high-tech sector will indeed come back to at least where it has been before the war. Now, the relationship with the rest of the world, where universities are concerned, I think there is a big difference between formal institutions, so research funds like the binational US-Israeli fund, or the GIF, right, the one with Germany, or the European Union. All of at institutional level, I don't think there is a problem. There is a huge problem. You probably, living in the United States, know more about that than I do. We read here the papers, and we hear the impressions of what is going on the campuses, and how meek the university leadership is in issuing clear statements where it is clear what is right and what is wrong. This is worrisome. This takes place also in Europe to some extent, although I follow Europe much more closely. There is a lot of sympathy in Europe, in particular when you talk about the again, the official levels of the European governments. They show a lot of understanding and a lot of support. And I think this is also true to a large extent, as I say, at the institutional levels. I don't hear much. I mean, European universities tend not to issue moralistic statements one way or another, and therefore also not, really unbelievably stupid statements as have been coming forth from really, really grand institutions like Harvard and others.
And Yossi Shavit has decided to leave us with an optimistic statement to end this. Yossi said that one scenario is that once the war ends, the USA, Saudi, Israel, Palestinian deal will get back on track. That may help our economy recuperate.
That if that happens, for sure true. It is for sure true.
Well, thank you very much, Yossi, for that last comment, and let's us leave a little bit happier. And thank you, Benny, for a wonderful, wonderful presentation. I'm sure we all learned a lot. Thank you all for joining us today, and we will continue this series going forward.